Welcome to this information presentation on how to protect yourself against COVID-19. My name is Kevin Watson from Samara Training Services. The aim of this short tutorial is to look at the science behind the control measures you're probably already doing and help you to understand why it's important to keep doing them. Before we leap into how we protect ourselves, let's spend a little time understanding what we mean by hazard and risk. Hazard is defined as anything that can cause harm. In the case of COVID-19, the harm would be chronic illness. Risk, on the other hand, is how great the chances are that the hazard will harm us. How we calculate risk depends on several factors that we'll discuss later in this presentation. Let's consider a different hazard for a moment. A shark. Most people would agree it is definitely hazardous. Our fear of sharks comes from our perception of what might happen should one attack us. However, a shark just swimming in the sea poses little risk until we get into the sea with it. So when we talk about risk, we actually mean how will I be harmed and how badly, and what is the likelihood of the hazard affecting me? In this case, the shark attacking. Now let's move back to the subject of COVID-19. COVID-19 is a virus, a particularly nasty hazard. To be hazardous, it requires a human host. Once the host is infected, it grows and starts to attack the respiratory systems. This hazard, unlike the shark, moves from victim to victim by our interactions with each other. It can be transmitted by direct and indirect contact. By direct, we mean by touching something that a host has touched and then infecting ourselves by rubbing our eyes or mouth, or indirectly by breathing in the virus from the exhaled air from the host. The hazard effect on the host is severe flu-like symptoms and potentially pneumonia. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is very minor and 5 would be mortality, this hazard sits firmly in the 4 to 5 range. Now let's look at assessing the risk. As we learned earlier, risk is a combination of impact or hazard effect and the likelihood of coming in contact with the hazard. If we consider the effect first, we have already mentioned it sits in the significant to severe zone. Now, assuming we don't put any controls in place, what would the likelihood of becoming infected be? Have we seen globally, this would be possible to likely. This would give us a risk level of high. To reduce this risk to an acceptable level, something in the medium zone, we need to apply some control measures. Control measures come in many forms. When considering which measure to use, we must first think about which aspect of the risk we're trying to manage. Some measures will reduce the hazard effect. For example, a bulletproof vest will reduce the effect of getting shot, or some measures will manage the likelihood of getting affected by the hazard, such as controlling the amount of people who have guns. The hierarchy of controls is a means of understanding which control measures are the most effective. On this diagram, we can see that eliminate is the most effective control measure. No hazard, no risk. Unfortunately for a virus, this will take time, and we can only play a small part in eliminating it. Secondly, substitution. We can replace a hazard with something less hazardous. Once again, this isn't possible with a virus. Next, let's look at engineering controls. We can do something here. By re-engineering how we live our lives, we can isolate ourselves from the hazard. Working from home, using video conferencing are good examples. Next is administrative controls, what we do on a daily basis. Social distancing will reduce the likelihood of us breathing in exhaled air from an infective host. Washing our hands more frequently will reduce the likelihood of us getting infected should we come into contact with the virus. And finally, personal protective equipment. This is our last line of defense and should not be used as our only control measure. Gloves and masks will help protect us, they're not as effective as isolation and social distancing. Now we have selected our control measures, we can look again at our risk matrix. As we can see, the hazard effect is unchanged, but with the 4 control measures in place, the likelihood has reduced to very unlikely to unlikely. This gives us an overall risk score of medium, acceptable in the current circumstances. Now to finish off, we'll look at our control barriers in action. This representation is known as the Swiss cheese model. The holes in the cheese represent times when our barriers might fail. For example, we can't stay at home all of the time. We might need to go shopping for food. In this case, the hazard will pass through the first barrier, but will get stopped by the next. If we're unable to keep safe distance from people, this barrier will fail, but the next barrier will stop the hazard. The point of this model is to highlight the importance of maintaining our barriers, but also understanding that should one barrier fail, we still have others to protect us. I hope you have found this short tutorial helpful, and please stay safe during these challenging times. For more information on online tutorials, please visit our YouTube channel at Samara Training Services. Thank you.